spirit. We must be a team.
Business is war. It's dog eat dog, rat eat rat.
You gotta have a problem that you want to solve.
You second, well, I'm second. We're going to have to tear down, rebuild, reconfigure, rethink the whole thing.
Hi, I'm William Bryant, and I'm going to talk strategic management. And yes, strategic management goes from planning and formulation to the implementation and execution, and of course the analysis and the adaptation, and kind of just cycles around. Yes, and there are numerous SWOT, GAP, PESTLE, STEEP, whatever you want to name it, resources and capabilities and so on. I will talk about those, but that's not really my point for this particular talk, because most of the time you find out strategies, however you're trying to plan along to get to that vision, they fail. Execution fails. A big part of that is because it's not instilled within the actual activities of the processes that you're undergoing. A good example, a couple of them, one being internal controls for a finance and accounting department. Internal controls are activities such as reconciliations that occur so that they can prevent and detect, yes, fraudulent activity, but really anything that could be materially concerning to the company, right? I mean, anything that's going to affect value. I mean, the companies have a lot of assets, equipment and vehicles, all of these things. And so all of the activities that you do to utilize or even purchase and receive these also have to include methods for which you're, trying to protect that asset at the exact same time and make sure that that asset is being used for the proper case. Well, it's no different when you're actually doing strategy. You plan all this strategy, and yeah, you want to do this product line or this integration because you're doing this acquisition or whatever. All of these things have to be actually laid into whatever you're currently doing in order for it to be successful. And that's the difficult part, because too often it ends up being like an additional step or an outside kind of, step in a process that isn't something that normally needs to be done. And you see that in tech upgrades all the time, right? People going back to the old way of doing stuff. And so my idea is different in that any strategy, if you go through any of the books, you need to have something that differentiates you, right? They talk uniqueness and differentiation. Differentiated competencies, core competencies. What are you good at? How is it different than your competitor? And then, of course, always, can your competitor imitate it is a big one. And so my push, and it fits right in, is with the data aspect. Because data, if you actually go through a real nurturing stage and treating your data like an asset and a resource that it is, and going through the entire life cycle, it can be your core competency. But above and beyond that, it can be the introductory piece to get you to dig deeper into your operations so that you actually do understand processes and process mappings and how to lay other things in. Because that's kind of the web that data is. It's naturally produced by the processes, and so it's already there. The questions that go along with it are ones that naturally follow, which encourages development and capital planning and all of the other things that coincide with strategy to get you where you need to go. Plus, data is the measure that you're going to use to evaluate the strategy anyway. And so, I mean, it's one of those things where you're like, wow, okay, maybe I should just look at data differently than how I'm looking at it right now. Because too often you see, for example, you've got brick and mortar locations, you're doing service orders, and they're entering in a customer ID or a new customer, and you run a B2Bs, or even an old customer, and you find out that not until the back end, when you're actually doing your agings, that you've got 4 entries for the exact same customer. You've got a comma Inc., you've got a comma CO for company, you've got a comma fully incorporated, or maybe you have no comma, no period, but all of these end up being similar entries for the exact same company, all having their own unique IDs, and all having to be cleaned up later. Never addressing the fact that the process should have included some kind of methodology for which to address companies that begin with the or end in some kind of an Inc. or company or whatever. Something that makes the errors minimized. Because if you can't get that right, how are you going to do an implementation of strategy? That's just throwing that out there. But being that the entire life cycle from where you're actually getting it sourced to however you're going to be able to access it, usually through some kind of an API, or if you do migrate it to a data warehouse, and looking at, okay, how is it managed? How is it governed? Most importantly, how is it curated? The more you can do to kind of generalize sets within, say, like a SQL database, and create tables and views that are then easily queried into, something that all of your analysts can use. For example, just like a BI workspace that you then just have sets that certain departments can work off of as source of truth. Then all of your models, all of your reports become refreshable on schedule and easily updatable. You can do real-time tracking, all of these things where you're not looking at CSV downloads anymore. It becomes, it can speed up reconciliations, and it also encourages you to say, okay, well, where is this data coming from? What application is it? We're looking at this process taking this long. Can we automate this product from this application that's giving us this data? Can we integrate into the next application? For example, if you have a purchase requisition system versus your AP, which could be two different systems. How do they talk to each other? How does it move from PR to PO, going into procurement so they can do contract agreements and service provider selection or supplier selection or whatever it ends up being before it actually goes on to be AP. All of those things are going to be asked once you start looking at data, what's being curated, how is the data being curated, and how is it being managed, and then how are we accessing it, how it comes out on the other end. Data analytics asks a lot of questions because you start to see not only numbers, but you start to see how it's listed. The unique thing about it is that in strategy, you're trained to do resource and capability analysis, right? Because you want to know scarcity of resources for future planning. That's always a big one. There are constraints and to capacity that you have for planning. And of course, just the general activities and overall competencies that you do really, really well. Well, one of the areas, or one of the things that you measure your resources and capabilities by is the VRIO method, because you want something that is valuable, it's rare, it's inimitable, and the O being the organizational alignment. How does it fit into the activities? Does it encourage that alignment? And your data is a map of alignment, but it's also valuable because it gives you all the information that you need, whether finance or labor related, any kind of like operational data. It's all there. It's obviously rare because you're the only one producing it, and nobody else is going to be able to copy it unless you're giving it out. Your IT and your data, it fits all of the requirements to give you an edge, and done well will give you more agility and adaptability to market conditions as well. And it should be treated as such. There shouldn't be as much of a lackadaisical approach to it. And it should be taught that way to the people who are actually utilizing it as well. Once you have something as a competency in a process like that, then it isn't as much to ask to do a similar thing for other strategic endeavors on top of it. This is just a base one that adds a foundation and will give you measurement for where you want to go, streamlining operations. So then when you actually have to go into further strategic management, which all requires more analytics when you're doing, other external gathering of intelligence in the general marketplace or on competitors, and really just concerned internally about overall process maps and processes and how you're doing, in different areas. All of that is going to be answered because you've already gone through all of it with your data. I mean, it gives you everything. Where did the data come from? Who's organizing it? Who's responsible for it? Where is it being stored? As I said, it does all of your process mappings, and it allows you to do benchmarking and comparison against other competitors within your industry. I mean, the foundations are numerous for what you can actually get out of it. Also, of course, what are you going to do when you actually do objectives? You're going to use that as your benchmarking or standard so that you can figure out, hey, are we doing better or not against all of these other activities? And in addition to, when you're actually doing the map around of where your data is coming from and you're looking at process flows and steps and what's going on, you're going to be able to identify the areas where you have bottlenecks. You're doing constraint analysis at the same time, which is perfect for your capital expenditure investment. If you alleviate the bottlenecks, I mean, bearing in mind that it's cost, appropriate, that's what, would hinder your profitability if you're running at max production. Your bottlenecks, you gotta, you open them up or you find out where the issues are. It might also help to have identification of where your learning and training is having issues. Because as you go and you check out processes and where the data is coming from and who's using what, how they're doing it, you should get a really good grasp on how well your people actually understand the current processes of operations that you're going through now. A huge competitive issue, obviously, is learning and training. Something's got to be dedicated to that, because if you're not able to get people to do the processes now and you're not really attentive to whether they understand them now, can you introduce a changed system? It doesn't matter how much attention you give to change management on the strategy if they're not able to do the current system or they just haven't had enough training on it. I mean, there are all kinds of issues. And strategy, any kind of execution occurs in the grit, on the floor level, the people doing it. Those are where the successful strategies occur. They don't occur up in the office level. I mean, yeah, it's grand ideas and wonderful concepts, and they sound really cool, and you think you can do a lot with them, but somewhere you got to do nitty gritty, and that's where you got to be, and that's where you have to have understanding. Obviously, it's more difficult for larger corporations to implement things like this, but that's planning and carry out, and that's why some of the strategies are for significant periods of time, 2-year, 3-year strategies. Hopefully having some adaptability and agility, which is where, again, that data aspect comes in, to react to, technology disruptions in the marketplace. Things that are going to actually be strategic risk factors as you're moving along, depending on how slow you are to move. Bigger companies being much slower to move to new strategies. And so it's really just kind of something I think is worth checking out, looking at using data as that framework to build on that first the first step of a strategic management process. Can we do it with our data, right? Can we turn that into a core competency? And if you can do that, then that means you probably understand the processes, so you can begin to introduce more strategy and more activities in the processes. This just kind of an opinion, and of course I'm pushing. I really like data, obviously, but yeah. Thank you.